Good morning.
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 Blessing of the Lord be upon you.
We bless you in the name of the Lord.
Lesson number 6 of the Intertestamental Period of History. We have finished up, as of last week, our lessons on Daniel's prophetic look at or visions of what would be happening in that 400-year, not only the 400-year period of history, but even going back to the Babylonian time period, which essentially you're going 539 years or so. So what we want to do, or at least start today, is going through that intertestamental period of history. We've already looked at an introduction of what we're studying, Daniel's prophetic view. We ended last week. What we're going to do, just starting off right now, is I call it procedural considerations. How are we going to approach this study? Because you're looking at least 400 years of history. There's so much that's there. We have to leave something out. We just can't go over every little detail. So our study will proceed on a timeline. Well, what timeline are you going to use? Well, we will concentrate historically on the kings, rulers of Persia, Greece, and Rome. So that gives us that narrow slice. Here's what we're going to concentrate on. We will emphasize points of interest to Judea and the Jewish people of the remnant and return. How are these people, these rulers, interacting with Judea, the Jewish nation, the Jewish people? We will look at some points of secular history, because it is a major time in world history, but that's not going to be our primary focus. The account of the first 100-year period is drawn from the biblical record in Daniel, Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi, Ezra, and Nehemiah. First 100 years. The events of the second 100-year period are taken from apocryphal and secular records. So you have 200 years there that we're going to look at primarily. And when I'm talking about this, I'm talking about the Persian Empire. 100 years of biblical history and 100 years of secular and apocryphal history. Make sense? So, the Persian Empire lasted from 539 BC to 331 BC. So that's almost 200 years. Well, it is a little over 200 years. That's why I split that. 100 years of it, you have biblical record. Then after that, you have to go to the secular and to the apocryphal. And you know what I mean by the apocryphal books. And basically, you're talking about Esdras and some of the other books. We won't get into that in too much detail. Those are books that come along even later than this time period. They look back and give a history. We'll talk a little bit about Josephus and some of the things he records, Herodotus, some of the things that he records. But we want to hit the highlights, and we want to make sure we're understanding what is going on with the Jewish nation, with Judea. All right, so the Medo-Persian Empire existed for approximately 100 years at the end of Old Testament prophetic period and extended approximately 100 years into the Intertestamental Period. So we include this in our study, the Medo-Persian Empire, because it's the transition period from Old Testament to secular history. We need to know what happened in that Medo-Persian history from the time the children of Israel or the Judeans are allowed to go back to Jerusalem and rebuild the temple. That'll form like a foundation for understanding the history of Judea in that larger geopolitical sphere. We'll see the roots of it. And then what happens will spring from all of that. So there's the map. You can see how far the Persian Empire extends. And there's a lot of fighting that goes on in Egypt, especially. They're constantly at battle for Egypt because Egypt is constantly in rebellion. So if you go back and you read the histories of it, they're fighting there. Well, if they're fighting there, that means they've got to come through that little area that's known as Canaan or Palestine or the Promised Land. So Judea's right in the middle of it. And they're fighting a lot up in the area of Asia Minor, and there'll be a lot of attempts to enter Europe and take Greece. One of the things that I haven't talked about much, and this is important, I think, in my opinion, it's very important. Remember who the sons of Noah were?
Shem, Ham, and Japheth.
Yeah, or Ham, Shem, and Japheth. Ham, Shem, Japheth. The three major races in biblical history. You predominantly have these two constantly fighting. It's Egypt and the East.
You said that little strip that comes out of Egypt right near, that's Canaan right in that area?
Right here's the, yeah. And this is where Israel is today. At this point in time and in history is really where you take into Japheth, that third son, the descendants of that third son who go to the north. Why is that important? Well, it's going to be important because when you get into New Testament times, Egypt is really falling off. The Semitic regions and the European regions are the ones where the church really grows. And the church especially takes off in Greece, Rome, in this area. We hear a lot about this area, the Occidental rather than the Orient, what's going on over here. In this area, I believe, right in here, is where Constantinople would be. And that was a very important place. Rome, over here, at one point, Constantine moves the capital of the Roman Empire over here. So you have history, the history of the world sort of changing to where the predominant influence is not Egypt and Persia, but becoming European. Follow along. This is where the seed roots of that, or the seeds of that are.
Can you explain a little bit about the Royal Road?
That's just on here. This is where, from Susa, the capital of the Persian Empire, this is just the road that they built to here to get to this area. Just like a highway.
Oh, it's a really
You know,
good
this is
road.
how they go. Trade route, you might even say. But later on, we'll talk about how that, and I've talked about it before, in this area, the Hellespont is where they build the bridge with ships to bring the Persian soldiers across to attack Greece. Salamis, one of these islands here, is this is Crete, this is Cyprus, I believe. Salamis is somewhere in here. We'll talk a little bit about that. The Spartans of 300, there was a time when Persia was attacking and they were coming through pretty strong. The Spartans hold them off. The Greeks retreat to Salamis. By the Spartans holding them off, it allows the Greeks to reconstitute their army and navy, so at the next battle, the Greeks repel them. And that's why the Spartans, you hear so much about the Spartans, and you know, they were willing to sacrifice themselves for their nation. And that was the start of the Grecian Empire. So we kind of clear on that. There'll be more as we go down through this for understanding that. So where we start off then is with Cyrus the Great. And Cyrus the Great ruled the Medo-Persian Empire from 539 BC to 331 BC. And I put it that way because that's when he destroyed Babylon. Well, he didn't destroy Babylon. A person under him destroyed Babylon, but he was the head of the empire. And that was from, well, like 550 or wherever. But we're going to start at 539 BC, and for 10 years he's going to rule the whole area. Babylon's going to be kind of a vassal state under him. So the kingdoms of the Medes and the Persians were on the rise in the latter stages of the Babylonian Empire. The two kingdoms merged under Cyrus in 550 BC, according to Daniel in chapter 5, verse 28. It had been prophesied that the Medes under Cyrus would defeat and destroy Babylon. That's in Isaiah 13, 17 through 20, Jeremiah 51, 11, and then verses 29 through 33, especially Isaiah chapter 45, verses 1 through 4. Now, we'll come back to Isaiah 45, 1 through 4 later. Darius the Mede, the uncle of Cyrus and commander of the army, took Babylon in 539 BC. That's recorded in Daniel chapter 5, verses 30 through 31. We talked about that before. The handwriting on the wall, right? Tonight, you're going to be judged, you're going to be destroyed. And the city of Babylon fell. The king, Belshazzar, he was killed. Babylon was a province, but now it's under Medo-Persian rule. Now, Cyrus the Great was a surprisingly benevolent ruler. He did not force the exile and cultural assimilation on conquered people like the Assyrians had and the Babylonians had. They come in, they destroy a nation, they exile people. He didn't do that. He allowed them to remain in their lands, allowed them to keep their own traditions, religions, and rights. That's pretty strange for a dictator, isn't it? Tradition holds that Cyrus read the prophecy of Isaiah 45 verses 1 through 4 and was impressed. Well, how did he get a copy of that? How did he get to read that? Well, did Daniel see that he got a copy of it? Did one of the high priests get a copy to him? We don't really know. But here's that Isaiah 45 verses 1 through 4. And remember, Isaiah was writing early 700s, before the destruction of the northern kingdom. And that would be almost 200 years earlier. Here's what he writes. Thus says the Lord to his anointed, to Cyrus, whose right hand I have grasped, to subdue nations before him, and to loose the belts of kings, to open doors before him, that gates may not be closed. I will go before you and level the exalted places. I will break in pieces the doors of bronze and cut through bars of iron. I will give you the treasures of darkness and the hoards in secret places, that you may know that it is I, the Lord, the God of Israel, who call you by your name. For the sake of my servant Jacob and Israel my chosen, I call you by your name. I name you, though you do not know me. 200 years earlier. So, this is from Josephus in his book Antiquities. There's the citation from that. Josephus wrote, accordingly, when Cyrus read this and admired the divine power, Yahweh, an earnest desire and ambition seized upon him to fulfill what was so written. So he called for the most eminent Jews that were in Babylon and said to them that he gave them leave to go back to their own country and to rebuild the city, their city, Jerusalem, and the temple of God, for that he would be their assistant, that he would write to the rulers and governors that were in the neighborhood of their country of Judea, that they should contribute to them gold and silver for the building of the temple, and besides that, beasts for their sacrifices. And we talked before in the book of Malachi, especially, how that, as long as the government was providing the animals for the sacrifices, they had sacrifices, but once that ceased, the people of Judea didn't want to give their animals, so they'd bring the halt, the lame, the blind. But this is Josephus. Now, Josephus writes 1st century, AD 1st century, but he's looking back at the history. And a lot of this might come from the Jewish traditions. But Herodotus will say things like this. Also, the Cyrus cylinder. The Cyrus cylinder will mention this, and it claims that Cyrus returned religious relics and allowed captured people from many nations taken by the Assyrians and Babylonians to go back to their homelands. So not only did he not exile people and destroy their temples, he allowed those that the Assyrians and Babylonians had exiled to go back to their homelands, which is very unusual. And then Ezra chapter 1, verses 2 through 4, this is where context for this. Thus says Cyrus, king of Persia, the Lord, the God of heaven, has given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and has charged me to build him a house at Jerusalem, which is in Judah. Whoever is among you of all his people, may his God be with him, and let him go up to Jerusalem, which is in Judah, and rebuild the house of the Lord, the God of Israel. He is the God who is in Jerusalem. Okay? Now, stop there for a moment. He still has this ancient Near Eastern concept that the gods are the gods of nations. Yahweh is the God of Israel. Maybe Marduk is the god of Persia or whatever his god is. That's the God, his God. And there's gods for each of the nations. Ra might be the god of Egypt. He still has that mindset, but he honors those gods. He may not worship all those gods, but he understands, but that's his thinking. That's where he starts the process. He's not like, even Nebuchadnezzar, at some point, Nebuchadnezzar says, the God of heaven, the God of the Jews, he is the supreme God. I don't think Cyrus ever comes to that point. But he recognizes he's the God of the Jews and should be worshipped where? In his nation, in Judah. Verse 4 then, and let each survivor in whatever place he sojourns be assisted by the men of his place with silver and gold, with goods and with beasts, besides free will offerings for the house of God that is in Jerusalem. When we get down to that point of time, talking more about Ezra, you'll see that, I believe it's the first 7 chapters of Ezra, go back and give the history of the Jews returning to Jerusalem. Not all of them went back, but certain ones of them did go back to rebuild the temple, to reestablish the religion, to rebuild the city. Different times, different returns of the people. All right, follow me? You following what's going on here? How this applies to the children of Israel. Okay. It's 11:09. I'm keeping track of the time. Okay. Cambyses, the second king. Remember when Daniel talks about it, there'd be 3 more kings after Cyrus. Really, there's going to be 4, but that third one, we'll talk about him later, but he's not much to mention. But Cambyses, on the death of Cyrus, becomes the head of the Medo-Persian Empire. I got the Mid-Persian here. I can't change that now. I'll have to see if I can do that in my notes, okay? Wherein Cyrus was prudent, cautious, wise, and often generous and forbearing, Cambyses grew up headstrong, impetuous, uncontrolled, and uncontrollable. He was consumed with his own greatness and power. He demonstrated contempt for the rights of others. His own happiness was all that mattered. Now that's coming from a lot of different sources. Cambyses' foremost endeavor was to succeed where his father had failed. Oh, where had Cyrus the Great failed? Completely taking Egypt. Bring that under his rule. Got some of it at different times, but they were always in rebellion. So his attack on Egypt was excessively violent and inhumane to the point many believed him to be insane. What were some of the things that he did? Well, when he attacked and he took like a place where King Cambyses, I guess I'll start it that way, was a king of Egypt, or like a pharaoh. And he had insulted Cyrus. How did he insult Cyrus? Well, there was a guy that had escaped from Egypt, and he'd come to Susa to Cyrus, and he became a confidant of Cyrus, and Cyrus, kind of asked him, well, he gave him information about Egypt, and he said, well, if you would marry one of the daughters of Cambyses, then you could have peace, and that would get you into where you could destroy them. So Cyrus sends a letter. Hey, I'm willing to marry one of your daughters. We'll become in-laws, and that'll make everything all right. Well, Cambyses didn't like the idea. But rather than just say no, he found a woman that looked like his daughter and sent her as his daughter to Cyrus to be a wife. Well, the guy who was over there apparently knew, well, that's not his daughter. So Cyrus took that as an insult, and Cyrus was attacking. He couldn't win. He's repelled. But Cambyses dies. Cyrus dies. Cambyses then comes down, and his reason for attacking is Cambyses has insulted my father, so I've got the right to attack. But he gets down there, and Cambyses is dead, and a new king is taken over. No reason to attack, right? Wrong. He goes ahead, and he goes to the tomb where Cambyses is buried, opens up the tomb, desecrates the tomb, and desecrates the body of Cambyses. And that's why many people thought, this guy's insane. But he uses that as the reason for the invasion, the pretext for the invasion. He attacked and ridiculed the Egyptian religion, something that Cyrus wouldn't have done, and for sure. He broke into their temples and desecrated their altars in any way that he could. In 525 BC, he entered a temple during a festival and killed the sacred bull of Apis. Now, there's some question on that, but you understand about sacred bulls, okay? What they would do, they had the sacred bull. They worshipped a calf, and that's where the golden calf, idea comes from. But they worship this golden calf. Well, these calves don't live forever. So what they have to do, they would search out in the country, and they'd find the best looking, have like county fairs where they would judge, and then they'd pick the best one, the blue ribbon, and that's the one they would take. And well, they're having this ceremony, and here's this bull, this sacred cow or bull of Apis, and he comes into the temple and he kills it. And that just, it's like, now, University of Texas, Longhorns. Could you imagine somebody from Oklahoma going down and killing their Longhorn? do you see how a lot of the things in our culture mimic the religious cultures of the pagans of the past? Anyway, he killed supposedly killed the sacred bull of Apis. Right? The lost army of Cambyses. He's there in Egypt. He spends a lot of time in Egypt. And in 524 BC, Cambyses sends 50,000 soldiers to attack the temple at Amun, A-M-U-N. Because he wants to be known as the Pharaoh of Egypt. You go back and you look, okay, Emperor of Persia, King of Persia, King of Babylonia, King of this, King, and Pharaoh of Egypt. Every place he'd conquer, he would be the supreme ruler. He wants to be noted. He wants the people of Egypt to bow down to him as the Pharaoh of Egypt. But these people are, they're in rebellion. So this contingent of 50,000 soldiers heads off into the desert to go over to this place, and they're lost in a sandstorm and never recovered. Few bones are found, a few weapons are found out there, but this is a big thing in history. What happened to the 50,000 lost soldiers of Cambyses? Well, this essentially ended Cambyses' expedition into Egypt. Then in the summer of 552 BC, Cambyses was traveling through Syria on his way back to Persia, back to the capital, remember Susa, okay? But he's going through Syria, which means he's already passed through Judea. He's on his way back. And he died mysteriously in Syria, either by his own hand or as the result of an accident. All right? So some reports claim he suffered from convulsions, which would then feed into that concept that he was insane, and that he was mounting his horse and he had a convulsion and fell, died accidentally. Others that he had learned that someone back in Susa had taken the throne and claimed to be the king, the new emperor of Persia, and that he was so distraught that he killed himself. Well, why would he be so distraught? Well, it's because he thought he killed the person a couple years earlier. And now this person that's claiming to be the king thought I killed him. We'll discuss that in just a moment, okay? But again, history's kind of, not clear on that. So though we want to concentrate on the ruler's interactions with Judea, we have little to go on here. But Cambyses was consumed with his attack on Egypt. That's the main point I want to focus here. The governors of Palestine were allowed to interfere with the building of the temple. Remember, they started to rebuild the temple, and what happens? They stop. Why? Because they got opposition. Why did they have opposition? Cyrus is gone. Cambyses doesn't care. He's down in Egypt doing what? Destroying temples and fighting against the Egyptians. So while this may seem bad, perhaps his personal absence in the conflict was a blessing to the Judeans. He was so consumed with Egypt that he didn't pay attention to what was going on in Judea, And Jerusalem, therefore, he didn't attack the Judeans as someone else might do. Let's see, who else might do something like that? Well, that's where we run into a guy by the name of Smerdis. Just sounds bad, doesn't it? Smerdis, also known as Bardiya, also known as Pseudo-Smerdis, also known as Artaxerxes. Artaxerxes. I did that once before and the preacher made fun of me. Artaxerxes. Okay. We'll put this all together and that will be our ending for today. Smerdis, also known as Bardiya, died in 522 BC. All right. The same year that who died? Cambyses. Right? He was the son of Cyrus the Great and brother of Cambyses. Maybe. Herodotus and King Darius claimed that Bardiya was murdered years earlier by Cambyses. Why? Because when Cyrus died, all right, Cambyses says, I'm killing him because I want the throne for myself. So he kills Smerdis. Okay? Gamada, a look-alike or pseudo-Smerdis, seized the throne when Cambyses dies. But Cambyses has heard about this stuff going on, and he's kind of worried. I thought I killed this guy. So now he's got, boom, Smerdis, he can declare he's the king. I'm the emperor. He reigned 8 months before he was killed by Darius, who succeeded to the throne. Now, some historians claim Darius invented the story of Gamada to justify his actions. That there really wasn't, they claim he invented the story that Cambyses killed Smerdis and invented the story of Gamada so that way Darius, hey, I had a right to kill him. He was lying. And I get the throne. This make a great movie, wouldn't it? So this Gamada, also known as Pseudo-Smerdis, is most likely the Artaxerxes of Ezra chapter 4, verse 7, 11, and 23. Because this is one of the most difficult passages in the Bible. All right? This is where critics will attack the church or attack the Bible. What happened to my... There it goes. Okay. Ezra chapter 4 and verse 7. In the latter days of Artaxerxes, Bishlam and Mithridath and Tabitho and the rest of the associates wrote to Artaxerxes, king of Persia. The letter was written in Aramaic and translated. That Artaxerxes, and let's go down to verse 11. We'll just finish these 3 passages. This is a copy of the letter that they sent. Men of the province beyond the river send greeting And now, okay, and he's talking about the Jews who are rebuilding the city, Jerusalem. They had already rebuilt the temple, and they're building buildings around the temple. But they're saying, hey, they're rebuilding the city, and if they rebuild the city, they won't obey you. They'll rebel like they always have before. Verse 23. Then when the copy of King Artaxerxes' letter was read before Rehum and Shimshai the scribe and their associates, they went in haste to the Jews of Jerusalem, and by force and power made them cease, made them stop the work of rebuilding Jerusalem. Now you go down to chapter 5, rebuilding begins anew. And you have Haggai and Zechariah. But when were Haggai and Zechariah preaching and getting the people to rebuild again? Is this after the temple's built? No, they were preaching and prophesying before the temple was rebuilt. So you see how the time frame comes. You have Cyrus, and then you have Cambyses, and then later you have Darius, and Darius is the one who sends the letter and says, start rebuilding the what? Temple, not the city. So when they're saying they're rebuilding the city, what they probably are meaning is they're rebuilding this temple. If they rebuild this temple, they're going to rebel against you. But who's the letter going to? Cambyses is down in Egypt. He doesn't care. Darius, he finds out what's going on. What does he do? He asks the people around him, oh, why is this? Well, Cyrus said they could go back and rebuild the city. Darius says, or rebuild the temple. Darius says, let them continue to work. There's got to be somebody in between there who says, stop the work. Who would that be? Well, here in Ezra, he's called Artaxerxes. And there's only one person that could fit that, and that would be who? Smerdis. Who for, what was it, what did we say, 7 months?
8 months with him.
8 months.
8 months he reigned.
8 months?
Yeah. D. You're
Yeah,
at 8 months.
8 months. Who for 8 months was on the throne. And that explains then why, when you get to after Darius, you have Xerxes, and after Xerxes, then you have Artaxerxes the first. So later on, when we get down there, I call Smerdis Artaxerxes X. Does that make sense? And yeah, Bible critics see, who is this Artaxerxes? The Bible's wrong. No, the Bible's right. It's just this same person's called by so many different names. But that's logically where you would put him at that place. That he stopped the work on the temple, Darius restarts it. And then you come down to the time of Artaxerxes first, allowed to rebuild the city. the walls of the city. All right, we'll quit there for today, which is good, I'm out of time. Do you have any questions?
Pretty interesting.
It is. There's a lot that goes on. We can only hit the highlights of it. But that's how it is. All right, thank you.